Sarah Martinez was cleaning the floors of billionaire Richard Sterling's Manhattan penthouse when she heard a desperate scream coming from 8-year-old Grace's room. She rushed toward the sound and found the little girl convulsing on the floor, her eyes rolling back while foam poured from her mouth. Without hesitation, Sarah abandoned everything and scooped Grace into her arms, racing down the emergency stairs to her beat-up Honda parked outside. As she sped through New York traffic toward the nearest hospital, steering with one hand while checking Grace's weakening pulse with the other, Sarah had no idea she was about to save not only Grace's life, but her own as well. What she couldn't imagine was that this desperate race through Manhattan would reveal a devastating secret Richard had hidden for years, and that a simple cleaning lady's heroic act would expose the true face of the family Grace thought she knew. Sarah Martinez had mastered the art of invisibility during her 3 years cleaning homes in Manhattan's Upper East Side. 40 years old, a single mother of 10-year-old twins, her hands worn rough from industrial cleaners and her back bent from endless hours scrubbing marble floors she could never afford. Her $1,200 monthly salary barely covered rent for Marcus and Luis, her boys. Richard Sterling's penthouse was her most prestigious assignment. 4,000 square feet overlooking Central Park, furnished with pieces that cost more than her annual rent. Richard, 45, owned the largest chain of luxury hotels on the East Coast, having built an empire from a small bed and breakfast he'd inherited from his father. But what made this job special for Sarah wasn't the extra money. It was Grace. Richard's 8-year-old daughter seemed to live in a golden but empty world. Her father constantly traveling for business, her mother dead in a car accident when Grace was 5, and her only steady company, the rigid British nanny Miss Whitmore, who treated the child more like a professional duty than a person. Sarah had immediately noticed that Grace was different from other wealthy children she'd encountered in her cleaning jobs. She wasn't spoiled or demanding, but seemed constantly sad, as if carrying a burden too heavy for her small shoulders. Often Sarah found her sitting alone in her enormous bedroom, surrounded by expensive toys, but wearing an expression of loneliness that broke her heart. Gradually, violating all the agency rules that forbade interaction with the family's children, Sarah had begun talking to Grace. At first, just shy greetings, then small conversations during cleaning, until it became the only real joy in both their days. Grace had started telling her about her nightmares, how she'd wake up screaming with no one coming to comfort her because Miss Whitmore slept downstairs with noise-cancelling headphones. Sarah had taught her a lullaby she sang to her twins, promising that whenever Grace felt lonely, she could whisper it and imagine Sarah was there with her. That Thursday morning in October, Sarah arrived at the penthouse at 7 as usual, when Richard had already left for Chicago, and Miss Whitmore had gone for her morning walk in Central Park. She'd started cleaning the living room when she heard a strange noise from Grace's room. At first, she thought the girl was playing, but then she heard a scream that froze her blood, a sound of pure terror that seemed to come from someone dying. Sarah dropped everything and raced toward Grace's room. The scene that greeted her stole her breath. Grace was on the floor, her body racked with violent convulsions. Eyes rolled back, showing only white foam spilling from her mouth. For an instant, she stood paralyzed. Then maternal instinct took over. She knelt beside Grace, checked that nothing was blocking her airway, turned her on her side to prevent choking. The girl continued convulsing, her body rigid as if electric shocks were coursing through it. Sarah knew she should call an ambulance, but Manhattan morning traffic would make it impossible to reach the penthouse quickly. Mount Sinai Hospital was 10 minutes away if she took the side streets she knew well from years of traveling between clients' homes. Without hesitation, she gathered Grace in her arms. The girl seemed to weigh nothing, her small, fragile body still shaking from convulsions. She ran toward the elevator, but it was out of service for maintenance. The stairs were her only option, 20 floors down, carrying a child in epileptic crisis. Sarah began descending 2 steps at a time, praying Grace would keep breathing. The girl had stopped convulsing but now lay motionless, eyes closed and skin terrifyingly pale. Sarah constantly checked the pulse in her neck, feeling it grow weaker and more irregular. Reaching the ground floor, she ran to her 2008 Honda. It was old and beaten up, but in that moment it was Grace's only hope for survival. She placed the girl in the passenger seat, buckling her in with trembling hands. Grace had reopened her eyes, but her gaze was vacant, her breathing increasingly shallow. Sarah started the engine and peeled out, keeping one hand on the wheel and the other on Grace's pulse. She knew Manhattan like the back of her hand. After years of moving from house to house, knew exactly which streets to avoid to escape the traffic. She drove like never before, running red lights, cutting off other cars, honking her horn. Meanwhile, she talked constantly to Grace, telling her about her days with Marcus and Luis, singing the lullaby, promising everything would be okay. When she reached Mount Sinai Hospital, she jumped out screaming for help. Doctors and nurses immediately rushed toward her, seeing a woman in cleaning uniform holding an unconscious child in her arms. What Sarah didn't know was that this desperate race through Manhattan would forever change not only Grace's life, but her own. Because in the frantic minutes that followed, as doctors fought to stabilize the girl, truths would emerge that would call into question everything she thought she knew about the Sterling family. Mount Sinai's emergency room exploded into frantic activity as Sarah burst through the automatic doors with Grace in her arms. Dr. Michael Thompson, head of pediatric emergency, took charge of Grace, while the medical team mobilized around the gurney. The doctor peppered Sarah with essential questions. When had the convulsions started? How long had they lasted? Had Grace hit her head? Sarah explained she worked as a cleaning lady in the Sterling home and had found Grace in that condition. She noticed something strange in Dr. Thompson's expression when she mentioned the Sterling name, a flash of recognition mixed with concern. As they rushed Grace into the emergency room, Sarah found herself in the waiting area, still in shock. Only then did she realize the gravity of what she'd done. She'd abandoned her job, taken her employer's daughter without authorization. She'd probably be fired, and losing this job meant being unable to support her children. But the only thing that mattered to her was Grace's well-being. This child had become important to her in a way that went beyond any professional relationship, as if she'd adopted her into her heart. After what felt like eternity, Dr. Thompson emerged from the emergency room. His expression was serious, but not desperate. He explained that Grace had suffered a severe epileptic seizure, but was now stable. They'd sedated her to stop the convulsions. She'd need days of observation to determine the cause. Then, lowering his voice, he asked if Sarah could speak with him privately in his office. There was something in Grace's test results that worried him. In the chief's office, Sarah discovered a shocking truth. Grace had traces of carbamazepine in her blood, a powerful anticonvulsant that had never been prescribed to her. The dose was excessive, almost toxic. Someone was giving Grace a strong medication without medical supervision. The convulsions weren't caused by epilepsy, but by an overdose. Sarah was speechless. Who could do such a thing to an innocent child? Dr. Thompson explained they were obligated to report the case to social services. Grace was a victim of pharmaceutical abuse, a form of maltreatment that was difficult to detect. At that moment, Richard Sterling burst in, alarmed by the hospital's call that had reached him during a meeting in Chicago. He was pale and agitated, and when he saw Sarah, his expression changed from concern to cold fury. He began shouting at her, accusing her of taking his daughter without authorization. Dr. Thompson cut him off sharply, explaining that Sarah had saved Grace's life by bringing her to the hospital in time. Then came the bombshell. He informed Richard about the carbamazepine traces in Grace's blood. Richard's face changed color, shifting from the red of anger to the gray of fear. Richard categorically denied ever giving Grace medications, suggested it might have been a hospital error. But Sarah, who had learned to read people during her years working in wealthy homes, saw something in Richard's eyes that made her suspicious. It wasn't surprise, it was fear. Not the fear of a father discovering someone had poisoned his daughter, but the fear of someone who'd been caught. Dr. Thompson explained that Grace would need to remain hospitalized under strict observation. Social services would launch an investigation to determine who had access to medications in the Sterling home. When Sarah left the hospital that evening, she knew her life had changed forever. She'd saved Grace, but she'd also opened Pandora's box that would reveal uncomfortable truths about one of New York's most respected families. As Sarah feared, elite cleaning services fired her immediately for violating company protocol. Strangely, Richard didn't press charges against her. Instead, through his lawyer, he sent her a check for $10,000 for medical expenses and trouble caused. Sarah understood the check wasn't gratitude, but an attempt to buy her silence. Richard hoped the money would convince her not to talk about what she'd seen at the hospital. But he didn't know Sarah. A mother who'd raised 2 children through enormous sacrifices would never be corrupted when it came to a child's safety. Instead of cashing the check, she took it to the police along with her detailed testimony about the strange behaviors she'd noticed in the Sterling home. She'd always thought they were just rich people's eccentricities, but now everything took on a different meaning. The social worker assigned to the case, Dr. Lisa Chen, was struck by Sarah's determination. It was rare to see someone give up a significant sum on principle, especially a single mother with 2 children to support. During interviews with Grace at the hospital, disturbing details emerged.
Enjoying the story? Give it a little like, and don't forget to subscribe. Now then, let's carry on.
The girl described feeling strange and confused in recent months, sometimes unable to remember entire days, having terrifying nightmares she'd never experienced before. All symptoms consistent with irregular psychotropic drug use. The most chilling detail came when Grace described how her father had started giving her special vitamins after her mother's death. Small white pills she had to take every morning with milk, which made her feel sleepy inside. The police investigation revealed that Richard had been purchasing carbamazepine and other psychotropic drugs through complicit pharmacies, forging medical prescriptions. The goal was to keep Grace in chronic sedation to make her more manageable while he focused on his business. But there was more. Grace was the sole heir to a multi-million-dollar trust established by her mother. If Grace died before 18, the entire fortune would go to Richard. A disturbing coincidence that opened a new line of investigation into his wife's death. The breakthrough came when Miss Whitmore, under pressure from investigators, broke down and confessed everything. Richard had blackmailed her. She had irregular immigration documents, and he threatened to report her if she didn't administer the drugs to Grace. The nanny had complied out of fear, but guilt was destroying her. Miss Whitmore also revealed that Richard had progressively increased the doses, saying Grace was becoming too lively. The overdose had resulted from this reckless increase. When police arrested Richard Sterling at his Hamptons estate, he denied everything. He accused Sarah of orchestrating everything to extort money from him, claimed Miss Whitmore was lying out of revenge. But the evidence was overwhelming. Grace's blood tests, forged prescriptions, the nanny's testimony, security camera footage. During searches of the Sterling home, they found an arsenal of psychotropic drugs hidden in his private study. Sedatives, antipsychotics, antidepressants, all purchased illegally and potentially lethal for a child. The trial for attempted murder began 6 months later. Sarah was the prosecution's key witness, and her testimony moved the entire courtroom. She spoke of Grace as a sweet child who deserved love, not sedatives and neglect. The real surprise came when Grace, now in temporary foster care in Connecticut, asked to testify. With a steady voice, she told the judge that Sarah was the only person who had ever shown her true affection. She said she wanted Sarah to become her new mother. In that moment, Sarah understood her life had truly changed forever. She was no longer just the cleaning lady who had saved a child. She had become the person that child considered her family. The trial against Richard Sterling became one of the most followed cases in American media. The defense strategy was to attack Sarah, painting her as an opportunist who had orchestrated everything to blackmail a wealthy family. But American public opinion massively sided with the simple woman who had risked everything to save a child. The prosecutor built a solid case based on material evidence and psychological reconstruction of Richard's behavior. During the trial, chilling details emerged. Grace had been practically a prisoner in her golden home, kept in constant sedation that prevented her from developing normal social relationships. The real breakthrough came when the prosecution proved that Richard's wife's death hadn't been accidental either. New analyses revealed traces of the same drugs in her body. Richard had probably killed his wife when she began suspecting his behavior toward Grace. The most touching moment of the trial was when Grace, now 9 and detoxified from the drugs, entered the courtroom to testify. She saw Sarah and ran to her shouting, "Mama Sarah." The girl told the judge that Sarah was the only person who had ever made her feel truly loved. When asked what she wanted for the future, Grace answered with a clear voice, "I want my Mama Sarah to never have to clean other people's houses again. I want us to be a real family." Richard Sterling was sentenced to 25 years in prison for murder, attempted murder, and aggravated child abuse. But for Sarah and Grace, the real verdict had already been pronounced by the heart of a child who had chosen where she wanted to belong. The final verdict opened a new chapter in Sarah and Grace's lives. With her father in prison and no relatives willing or able to care for Grace, social services had to find permanent placement for the child. The bureaucratic process was long and complex. Sarah wasn't married, lived in a 600-square-foot apartment with 2 children, and until months before had been a cleaning lady. But the case had attracted public attention, and many citizens mobilized to support Sarah. The decisive moment came when Grace turned 10. During the hearing for her permanent custody, the judge asked the girl to explain why she wanted to live with Sarah. Grace answered that she had lived in a big house, but had always felt alone. With Sarah, even in the small apartment, she felt safe and loved. The judge authorized Grace's placement with Sarah under a support program. But what truly changed Sarah's life were the job offers that began arriving. Her story had inspired so many people that companies and foundations wanted to hire her. Sarah chose the Children's Defense Fund, becoming regional coordinator for child abuse prevention. It was work that allowed her to use her experience to help other children with the economic stability necessary for her expanded family. Grace blossomed in her new family. Marcus and Luis welcomed her as the sister they hadn't known they'd always wanted, protecting her at school and helping with homework. To them, Grace wasn't the criminal millionaire's daughter, she was simply their little sister. Sarah watched her 3 children play together and realized she had saved Grace. But Grace had saved her too, showing her that inside every ordinary person is a hero waiting for the right moment to emerge. 3 years after that dramatic October morning, Sarah Martinez sat in Columbia University's auditorium, addressing 200 psychology students who had come to hear her testimony about signs of child abuse. She was no longer the invisible cleaning lady, but a respected professional in child protection. Her work at the Children's Defense Fund had given her not only economic stability, but a purpose that went beyond daily survival. She had helped dozens of children in difficult situations, using her experience to recognize signs others might miss. Grace, now 13, sat in the front row next to Marcus and Luis, now 14. The 3 siblings had become inseparable, a close-knit team facing adolescence's challenges together. Grace had completely recovered from the drug damage and was excelling in school. She wanted to become a pediatrician to help other children. During the conference, Sarah told her story without dramatizing, with the simplicity of someone who had lived extraordinary events but accepted them as part of her destiny. She explained to students the importance of trusting instinct when protecting children. A student asked what she had felt in that crucial moment when she had to decide whether to help Grace or protect her job. Sarah answered that she hadn't even thought about consequences. She had seen a child in danger and done what any mother would do. That same evening, the Martinez Sterling family gathered around the kitchen table for dinner. It was a ritual Sarah had established. Every evening, everyone shared the best and most difficult thing from their day. Grace told about receiving a letter from a girl in Chicago who had seen her story on television and wanted to thank her for proving you could be happy even after experiencing terrible things. Marcus talked about his success in the math competition. Luis complained about his Latin test, but boasted about defending a smaller classmate from bullies. When Sarah's turn came, she looked at her 3 children and said the most beautiful thing had been seeing Grace smile during the conference, proud to be part of a family that had transformed pain into help for others. After dinner, while the kids did homework, Sarah received a surprising call. It was Richard Sterling, calling from prison. In 3 years, he had never tried to contact Grace. He had a different voice, smaller, as if prison had reduced his arrogance. Richard said he had followed Grace's story in the newspapers and was happy to know she was doing well. He didn't ask for forgiveness, but told Sarah he was grateful Grace had found a real mother. Sarah didn't respond with anger. She simply said, Grace was an extraordinary child who deserved all the world's love. It wasn't forgiveness, but it wasn't hatred either. It was the serene indifference of someone who had found peace. That night, while checking that her 3 children slept peacefully, Sarah stopped in Grace's room. The girl slept soundly, no longer plagued by the nightmares that had tormented her. On the nightstand was a photo of their complete family, taken during their first vacation together at the beach. Sarah remembered that morning 3 years ago when she had taken Grace in her arms and run to the car. In that moment, she thought she was saving only one child. She didn't know she was saving herself, saving the possibility of becoming the person she had always been destined to be. The cleaning lady who lived in shadows had become a courageous mother, protecting not only her own children, but all the children she met in her work. She had discovered that true luxury wasn't living in a penthouse, but waking up every morning knowing you had made a difference in someone's life. Destiny had used an epileptic crisis to bring together 4 people who needed each other. Together, they had become stronger than they ever would have been apart. When Sarah woke the next morning, hearing Grace singing in the shower, the same lullaby she had taught her years before, she smiled, knowing that some rescues are mutual. She had saved Grace from poisoning, but Grace had saved her from a life of invisibility. The story that began with a desperate race to the hospital had become proof that true love can conquer everything, and that sometimes all it takes is the courage of a simple woman to change an entire family's destiny and prove to the world that heroes really exist. They wear work uniforms and have hearts bigger than any luxury penthouse. Like, if you believe maternal love can overcome anything, comment which moment moved you the most. Share to honor all the brave mothers who protect children. Subscribe for more stories of courage and family. Sometimes guardian angels wear work uniforms and drive old cars. Sometimes saving a life means saving yourself. And sometimes the truest families are born from the courage to do what's right.